Dear beloved viewers, this is a touching story about lytuca, a single mother who suddenly fell seriously ill during her 6th month of pregnancy, putting both her and her unborn baby in danger. CEO Hung, the man who had quietly cared for her from afar, dropped everything to look after her and her 2-year-old daughter, Han. His silent devotion slowly began to warm her wounded heart, but will she have the courage to love again? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more episodes. The rain had just begun to fall outside the window, a soft drizzle that kissed the glass panes of lytuca's modest apartment. Inside, everything was quiet except for the playful giggles of little Han, just 2 years old, as she tried to stack her toy blocks higher than her head. But behind that peaceful scene, something was terribly wrong. Lytuca's hands trembled as she stirred a pot of soup in the kitchen. Her head felt heavy, her body aching with a deep, unfamiliar fatigue. She was 6 months pregnant, and for the past few days, she had been feeling under the weather. At first, she brushed it off. She was used to handling pain. Ever since her bitter divorce, she had taken care of everything alone, raising Han, working part-time, and now preparing for the arrival of a second child without anyone's support. But this time was different. A sudden wave of dizziness hit her like a crashing tide. She gripped the counter to steady herself, but the world around her tilted violently. The spoon clattered to the floor. Her breathing grew rapid. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead as she stumbled toward the living room, where Han looked up with innocent, worried eyes. "Mama?" the little girl whispered. Lytuca tried to smile, but her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the floor. Half conscious, her thoughts grew frantic. The baby. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly. Please, not now. Luckily, she wasn't alone. Just minutes later, CEO Hung arrived at her apartment. He had promised to drop by after a meeting. He often checked on her and Han, quietly, never asking for anything in return. He was the kind of man who said little but did much. He found her unconscious, Han crying beside her. Without hesitation, he scooped lytuca into his arms and rushed her to the hospital. All his business calls, meetings, and appointments vanished from his mind. Nothing else mattered. At the hospital, the emergency room lights buzzed overhead as doctors worked quickly. Hung stood frozen in the hallway, holding Han close to his chest, his jaw clenched with worry. The words of the doctor still echoed in his ears. The mother's condition is serious. She has a high fever and low blood pressure. The fetus is showing signs of distress. We need to monitor both immediately. It felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. This wasn't just about a woman he admired from afar. This was about her, Lytuca, the woman he had silently loved for years. And this was about their child, even if the child wasn't biologically his. Hung had already accepted Han as his own. He'd made a quiet vow to protect both her and her unborn sibling. While Lytuca lay unconscious, tubes attached to her frail arms, Hung didn't leave the hospital. He cradled Han in the waiting room, rocked her to sleep, and answered every call from the medical team with a calm that barely hid his storm of emotions. His assistant called about an urgent meeting with foreign investors. He replied without hesitation. Postpone everything. My family needs me. In that moment, CEO Hung wasn't just a powerful businessman. He was a man watching over the two most precious people in his life, praying silently that he wouldn't lose them. As the night deepened, the monitors beside lytuca's bed beeped steadily. She was stable for now, but the danger hadn't passed. And Hung stayed right there, by her side. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of monitors and the gentle light from a bedside lamp. Outside the window, dawn was breaking, casting a pale gold over the city skyline. But inside, time seemed to stand still. Lytuca lay motionless on the hospital bed, her face pale, her breathing slow and steady. Her fever had finally begun to drop, but the doctors warned that both she and her unborn child needed constant monitoring. Recovery wouldn't be quick. Sitting by her side, CEO Hung hadn't moved all night. His suit jacket was draped over the chair. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, and his tie had long since been loosened. In one arm, he gently cradled little Han, who had finally fallen asleep after hours of confusion and fear. Her tiny hand clutched the collar of his shirt as if afraid he might leave. But Hung wasn't going anywhere. He had cancelled every meeting, silenced every call. His assistant had tried to reason with him. "Sir, the board needs you. The investors from London are waiting." But he simply replied, "They can wait. This is more important." He sat there, hour after hour, quietly watching over the two people who had come to mean more to him than anyone else in the world. From the moment he met lytuca, there had been something different about her. She wasn't flashy or loud. She was strong in silence, graceful in pain. Even after her failed marriage, she never complained. She never asked for help, and that made Hung want to help her even more. He remembered the first time he saw her wipe tears away when she thought no one was watching. The way she held Han tightly on the bus, whispering lullabies while pretending to sleep. The quiet strength in her eyes, even when her world was falling apart. Now, seeing her like this, so vulnerable, so fragile, stirred something deep within him. Not pity, but something more powerful. Love. Respect. Devotion. As the morning light crept into the room, lytuca stirred slightly. Her eyes fluttered open, still clouded with exhaustion. The first thing she saw was Hung, still holding Han, sitting beside her, his face lined with worry and sleeplessness. "You stayed?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Hung looked at her, relief washing over his face. He nodded softly. "Of course. I'm not going anywhere," he said gently. Tears welled up in her eyes. She turned her head slightly and saw Han asleep in his arms. For a moment, her breath caught. "You took care of her, all night?" Hung nodded again, his voice calm. "She was scared. I promised her you'd be okay." Lytuca bit her lip to stop the tears, overwhelmed by the quiet care, the unwavering presence of a man who owed her nothing, yet had done everything. In her heart, something cracked open. A warmth. A whisper of hope. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. Days passed, and lytieuca's condition slowly improved. The color returned to her cheeks, her fever faded, and the baby in her womb began to stabilize. The doctors were hopeful, but reminded her she needed rest, both for her body and her heart. Through it all, CEO Hung remained a constant presence. Every morning, he brought warm food and fresh flowers to her bedside. He read picture books to little Han, who had quickly grown attached to him, so much so that she would cry if he left the room. And at night, when the hospital quieted down, he stayed with them until lytieuca fell asleep, his calm voice offering quiet reassurance. She watched him closely, silently, often pretending to be asleep just to observe how gently he cradled Han, or how tenderly he adjusted her blanket without waking her. There was no performance, no expectation. He never spoke of his feelings. He simply cared. And that scared her. One evening, as the sun set behind the buildings outside her window, casting a soft amber hue over the room, lytieuca sat up and spoke. "Why are you doing all this, Hung?" Her voice was low, hesitant. "You don't owe me anything. I'm just a woman with baggage. A child. And another on the way." Hung looked up from the coloring book he had been filling in with Han. He met her eyes, not with pity, but with something far deeper. "I don't care about baggage," he said softly. "I care about you. About Han. About the life growing inside you. You're not a burden. You're a miracle that survived too much alone." Her throat tightened. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I don't know if I can trust anyone again. My ex, he broke me. Made me feel small. Unlovable. I'm afraid." Hung didn't move toward her, didn't pressure her. He simply nodded, understanding without judgment. "I know. And I'm not asking you to trust me today. Or tomorrow. I'll wait. For as long as it takes." That night, after Han fell asleep curled between them, lytieuca sat in silence, watching the lights of the city flicker like distant stars. Her heart ached with the weight of the past, the betrayal, the loneliness, the broken dreams. But in the quiet hum of the hospital, she also felt something else. Hope. She glanced at Hung, who had drifted into a light sleep on the visitor's couch, still fully dressed, one hand resting near Han. He looked peaceful, protective, real. Maybe she wasn't ready to say yes. Not yet. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel broken. She felt healing. And somewhere deep in her heart, a small voice whispered, "Maybe this is the beginning of something new."